Hey guys, it's Alex, and today I'm here with my August wrap-up. I read 9 books in August, which is a bit lower for me, but August was kind of a weird month for me, reading-wise. There were a lot of things that happened in August, just like general life things that kind of took precedence, so I wasn't reading the entire month, but I'm still very happy with these 9 books. The first book that I read in August was White House Autumn by Emerson White. This is the second book in the President's Daughter series, which I started in July. This is my favorite series of all time by my favorite author of all time, and I of course gave this book 5 stars. This series is about the daughter of the first female president. It was originally written in the 80s and then kind of revamped and republished with a new 4th book in the 2000s. I love this series. I think it's wonderful. I think Meg is an amazing character. I think it's funny. I think it's heartwarming. This book in particular is about an assassination attempt on Meg's mother, and it focuses very specifically on that event and the weeks surrounding that. I think it's wonderful. I always highly recommend this series. And then I read the 3rd book in the series, Long Live the Queen. This deals with Meg's abduction by terrorists. I cried through about 250 pages of this book, so of course it got another 5 stars from me. It's amazing. It is really so emotional and touching, and Emerson White has this really wonderful, down-to-earth style of storytelling where she really captures these characters as real people. Everything seems so small, and because it's so small, it's so relatable. Everything is so detailed. Each character is so specific that I really can't help but just cry through this entire book. I wasn't expecting this to be as emotional as it was, but there is a 4th book in the series and I'm not reading it yet. I kind of needed a break from the emotional trauma, but I love this series, and even with the sadness in this book, it's still really funny. Meg is this really intelligent character, and you really get that from the way she speaks and the way she thinks, and it's so interesting to follow her train of thought. There's also a strong focus on family in these books. Her mother is the president, her father is the first gentleman, she also has 2 younger brothers, and they are a very close-knit family, although not always in stereotypical ways. And they're just wonderful. In all ways. I'm going to have a review on these coming through soon, and it's a fairly long review, but there's so much to love about these books, and I really recommend them to anyone who likes contemporary YA. And then I read In the Lake of the Woods by Tim O'Brien. This was recommended to me by Brian over at Bookish. He really loves Tim O'Brien, and I gave this book 3 stars. This is an adult contemporary written in the 90s about a Vietnam vet who has recently lost a race for the US Senate. He goes away to a cabin with his wife, and then his wife disappears just a few days after they arrive. I really wanted to like this book. It had all the elements that I should have enjoyed. I love Vietnam stories, especially if they're talking about My Lai, which this book was. I love books that deal with politics. I love missing persons cases, and it was all of these elements in a book that felt very well written and very well constructed. And I just didn't like it that much. It was fine. I was interested in it, but I wasn't invested in the story or any of the characters, and I think that's why it got 3 stars. But people kept recommending another Tim O'Brien book to me when I mentioned this in my vlog. They were recommending The Things That Carried, so I'll definitely be trying that because this did feel like a book that was very well done. It was just missing something crucial that left me feeling disconnected from the story. Then I read The Rest of the Story by Sarah Dessen. This is her 2019 release. It's a YA contemporary romance novel about a young girl whose mother died when she was a child. She's been estranged from her mother's family ever since, and then one summer she has to go to stay with them for a few weeks, where she meets a cute boy and discovers a lot of things about herself and her family. I gave this 3 stars. It's not that I dislike this book, or really dislike most Sarah Dessen novels, because I do love her in general. I just feel like as a reader, I'm growing tired of them because they're very formulaic. It's the same things. It's not just the same story formula, but the same specific elements that keep being brought up. The same characters, the same relationships, the same themes. It's specific things, but also general things. And I feel like I'm reading the same book that's just put together in a different way. And I think because of that, I'm just getting a little tired of Sarah Dessen's novels, at least her new work. I do think her old work still holds up very well for me. But this was a fine YA contemporary romance. It was kind of inoffensive. I don't think there's anything really special about it, but I don't think there's anything bad about it either. It was just fine and mostly kind of forgettable. Then I read Shadow Tag by Louise Erdrich. This was another recommendation from Brian over at Bookish, and I'm so glad that I read this one. I gave it 4 stars. This tells the story of a woman in an abusive marriage. Her husband reads her diary, so she starts a second secret diary and uses the first diary to manipulate him. And then it kind of turns into an entire family affair and just a book about the downfall of this family. I thought it was so well written. I did struggle a lot with the beginning, which was why I think this book got 4 stars from me, because towards the end I was just entirely engrossed and sucked into the story. But I do think the beginning focused a lot on the diary, and that made it feel kind of strange because it didn't fit with a lot of the themes of the book, and then once it stopped being about the diary, because that part kind of fell away from the main story a lot, I was kind of lost and I didn't really understand where it was going. I don't know that this was a very good place to start with Louise Erdrich, but I do think it was so well done and I really loved it. Like, once I was about 100 pages in and I realized what I was reading and the story kind of got going and I was invested in all the characters, it was wonderful. Like, this was a book that I think the first 2 days I was reading it, I read about 20 to 30 pages a day. And then on the 3rd day, I just read the rest of the book because I loved it. This is also like her lowest rated book on Goodreads, or one of her lowest. So that leaves me with a great deal of hope for the next Louise Erdrich book I read, because I will definitely be picking up more of her. One element that I really love, just to say something specific and not just talk in the vague, the main character's husband, the abusive one, is an artist and he largely paints her. And there's a great deal of discussion about art in this book and how he tries to, in a way, possess her through his art. There's discussion of art in terms of Native American art, and because they are Native American, he is known as a Native American artist, and their culture plays a lot into their lives, and it was beautiful. Like, this was an incredible book, and I'm so excited to look into more from her. And then I read Where Men Win Glory by Jon Krakauer. I buddy read this with Cozy Reader Kelly. I believe this is our second Jon Krakauer book that we have buddy read together, but we've both read several of his other works, and he's just wonderful. But I gave this book 3 stars. This is the story of Pat Tillman, who was an NFL football player who turned down a multi-million-dollar contract to sign up for the Army after 9/11. This tells the story of his life and the friendly fire incident that caused his death, about which there was a cover-up. I was very interested in the friendly fire incident and his death and the cover-up and everything that happened kind of around there, but he didn't die until about 250 pages into this 350-page book, so the bulk of this book was kind of just about him and his life. And if you're interested in a character study of Pat Tillman, or you want to learn more about Pat Tillman as a person, this is a great book to read. I think it was incredibly well done. I don't think it was any worse than Jon Krakauer's other books. I just was not interested in Pat Tillman. I found him very unlikable. He seemed very arrogant. He was a hothead. He got into fights a lot, and it was just, he was not a person that I found very pleasant. And because the book was about him and his life, it was not very pleasant to read because of that. I love the part about his death, like, not because he died. I think it's very tragic that he died. I didn't like him, but he was by no means a terrible person. He was just not someone I personally liked. But just how the friendly fire incident happened and the history of friendly fire incidents in the Army, and the cover-up and how they covered it up, that was all fascinating to me. And that was kind of why I picked up this book, but it was only, the last 100 pages. So again, if you're interested in Pat Tillman, this was wonderful, but this was not a book that really appealed to me personally. Although it was a worthwhile read, and I'm very glad that I read it. And then I read The Radium Girls by Kate Moore. This is a nonfiction book about women who worked in factories painting watch dials with radium paint in the 19-teens and 1920s mostly. They later became sick with radium poisoning because they used the paint with no protective gear, and they would put the paint in their mouth because they were instructed to do that. And this is the story of them and how they got sick and what the companies did wrong. And they're suing the companies in order for the companies to accept responsibility for what they did to these women. I gave this 5 stars. Like, I expected this book to be good going in. I expected this to be a solid, worthwhile read. But this was amazing. This exceeded all my expectations by far. It was so incredibly hard to read. This was as close as a nonfiction book can get to horror, I think, because it was horrifying. The radium poisoning itself was awful to read and really hard to read because it put these women's bodies through hell. Like, they suffered so horribly because of radium poisoning. And some of them died very young. Some of them were dead before they turned 21 because they were working in these factories as teenagers. But it's also hard because the company was almost cartoonishly evil in the way that it treated them. It was incredibly difficult to read, but also so worthwhile and so fascinating. This is a 450-page nonfiction book, and I literally read it in 2 sittings because I did not want to put it down. And it just feels like reading this book does such a service to these women who really just wanted their story told so it wouldn't hurt anyone else the way they were hurt. I highly recommend this book. It was fascinating. It was wonderful. I adored it. I have a full review of it up that I will post down below, but it was just amazing. Like, I highly, highly recommend this book. This will definitely be one of my favorites of the year. And then I read Tell Me How You Really Feel by Aminah Safi. This was recommended to me by Ernest Alex Reed, who I will link down below. I gave this book 4 stars. This is a young adult contemporary romance about 2 girls who hate each other. One is a film nerd and one is a cheerleader, and they wind up falling in love and having a cutesy romance, and it is lovely. I will say that I was on the fence of 3 and 4 stars for this one because it was fun, it was cute, it was lovely. I don't think it was anything really special. I do think it had a fair number of flaws in the story, but I gave it the benefit of the doubt, which may have been a bit generous, but it was fun. Like, I was down for this book the whole time. I thought it was cute, I thought the relationship was lovely, and I was just rooting for them. And it's nice to read just a cute, fluffy book where you're just rooting for the leads to be together and be happy, and that was what this was. This is inspired by Gilmore Girls' The Paris Rory ship, and you can definitely see that. I think at times it was much, much too close to that. There were, like, details and scenes and almost exact quotes that I could point to as being from Gilmore Girls, and it was definitely too much for me. I liked it more when it was just loosely inspired by that, rather than almost like a retelling. But if you're a fan of Gilmore Girls and you like cutesy YA, Simon versus the Homo sapiens like books, I recommend this because I think it was lovely, I think it was fun. I don't think it's going to blow any minds, but I do think it was just like one of those reads that is sweet and fun and lovely and made me happy. And then the final book that I read in August was for the rereadathon, and I reread 1984 by George Orwell. The prompt was to read a second chance book, which is something you did not like, and I hated this book when I read it in high school, and I hated it now. I gave this 2 stars. This is a classic dystopian novel about Big Brother and Winston, who lives in the world where Big Brother listens to everything you say, and I don't even know how to describe this because it's just so important to pop culture that everyone kind of understands what this book is. And I will say, I appreciated the world that was built. I liked the exploration of the government. I thought that was interesting. I liked Winston's character arc. I thought that was interesting. I just did not like the story. And it's like, I can't rate this book highly because the world is interesting when I really hated the story. I hated the romance in this book, and I'm a romance fan. Like, I like when romances are explored in various ways, when they're cute and fluffy or when they're dysfunctional. Like, I've talked about several books already in this wrap-up that had romances that I thoroughly enjoyed. It's just, I hated the girl he had the romance with. She was a very annoying character. I hated the way the romance kind of took over the story. I hated that there were all these things going on and he was just kind of concerned with screwing his girlfriend. And I hated the ending in the scene with the rats. And it was unpleasant. This is an unpleasant book. It was very boring. There were excerpts from a book that Winston reads that basically just explained all of Orwell's thoughts on society and how he thought it was going to, like, become the world of Big Brother and how that was going to happen, but he'd already explained it through the context of the book, and it was rough. I don't think I'm ever going to understand why people love this book so much, because it was just a thoroughly unpleasant read for me. But at least I read it as an adult, so I can kind of articulate why I didn't like it. And that has been my August wrap-up. Let me know down below if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them if you have. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.